Hello and welcome to Hey Ask Me Stuff, the show where you get to ask me stuff. My name is Ken Coughlin, Christian apologist extraordinaire, and guess who's back this week?
Hey,
that's your cue.
How's it been?
Thank you, BA. I can't hear you. I'm supposed to be able to hear you.
You definitely should be able to hear me.
I cannot hear you. I heard you before we went on air, and now I cannot hear you.
Uh-oh. Well, I'll fix it. We'll fix it in post.
We'll fix it in post. Or not. We'll see. This is kind of fun. And speaking of that, if you know what that term means, that also tips you off that, yet again, we are not live this week. We had intended to go live this week at Wednesday at 3 o'clock, and then I got summoned to a mandatory meeting Wednesday at 3:10. So we could have gone live for like 10 minutes or maybe 8 in order to give me time to get down to the meeting. But that wouldn't have been very productive. And so then we were like, okay, well, maybe we just won't do a show this week. We didn't want to. But the topic of the show this week was kind of timely to this week. So pushing it off a week kind of would have been a little bit awkward. So we decided we're going to try to pre-record our program again this week so there's still something to get out there to you. And, God willing, we'll be back again live next week, Wednesday at 3 o'clock. But thank you for joining us again. If you're first time joining us here at Hey Ask Me Stuff, this is the show where we try to make as much as possible our topics determined by our viewers. So it's whatever is on your mind, and it could be questions that people submit to us online. That's one way you can get your question to us. And the way you do that is by going to our website, which is trinityjoppa.org/askmestuff. If you go visit that website, there's a form you can fill out where you can submit a question for the show, and we can look it over, and you never know, you just might see your question get answered here on the air. Also, we generally post prompts on Reddit, usually on Monday morning. Those are typically after we've already kind of got an idea what the show is going to be about, and we want to get some more detailed thoughts from people about that. You can respond to that as well. Or, like I said, pass us in the hallway if you know us. I mean, some of the topics have been just that. Someone has stopped us in the hall and asked us a question, and we go on the air with it. But today's question, the title of our episode here is, how should Christians vote? Now, what we mean by that here today is not who should you vote for? That's a different question. We're not going to go into that. But how should you make that decision? A lot of people, there's different views out there, I think, in the Christian church as far as, number one, whether we should even should vote, whether we should participate in the political system in that way. And then even for those of us that feel that we should vote, the question is, well, how do I make that decision? Some people, I got to be honest with you, it almost is like you check the Christianity at the door, and we think of voting as being kind of our private thing, or maybe we think the Bible doesn't have anything to say about it, and so we kind of do our own thing when it comes to that, and maybe not approaching it the way we should be. So I want to kind of just have a quick episode today where we talk a little bit about some of the principles that we as Christians that live in democracies or democratic republics or, that type of form of government, and we have this privilege of being able to vote, how we should go ahead and exercise that. And so I do want to start out, this is going to sound a little bit like a Bible study, but I want to start out with a brief reading. Something that's probably going to sound familiar to a lot of folks out there, but that can guide a lot of our discussion today. And that reading is from the book of Romans, chapter 13, verses 1 through 5. And here's what it says. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid. For rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, angels of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. Now, what's really most telling about this passage is when we reflect and realize that Paul wrote this at the time that he was under the authority of a very oppressive Roman Empire, and yet he was still encouraging people to obey the authorities. And we can look at some of what he said here, and we can say, well, wait a minute. It says, for rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. And he goes on to say that, hey, if you do the right thing, you're going to get commended by the authorities. Well, is that always true? I mean, was that always true under the Roman Empire? No, of course it wasn't. But what we see here, something we see many, many times throughout the Bible, is that there are principles that we as Christians should be trying to exemplify. There are ideals for the way God has set up the world. Now, does that mean that we as humans always live up to those ideals? No, of course we don't. And so when Paul says we should be obeying the authorities, does that mean no matter what the authorities say, we should always be obeying it just as a blanket matter? No. If you have authorities that tell you, oh, I don't know, hey, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, why don't you come kneel down to this giant statue of me and worship me like I'm a god, all right? You don't obey that authority, right? And so there is still a higher authority, that of God, that we have to be obedient to. But if we were all doing our job the right way, including those who are in authority, then these words of Paul would hold true. And so this is the principle that we are supposed, the general principle that we as Christians are supposed to use to guide our lives, understanding that because authorities are run by fallen human beings, there may be times like the Nebuchadnezzar situation I was just referring to, where we don't follow the authority, we follow God. If the authorities tell us to do something that's contrary to God, then we don't follow that. But for the purposes of our discussion today and the question of how should Christians vote, first thing I want to draw out of this passage is it does say there is no authority except that which God has established, which means that the fact that we have these rulers over us, and frankly, the fact that we live in a system that allows us this opportunity to vote, where we do vote for our rulers, that's something that has been ordained, if you want to use that word, by God, all right? That is part of, at least in a general sense, part of his plan. And so if authorities are something that have been established by God, then I don't think we should take that lightly. And I don't personally think, I don't agree with the camp that would say, well, because they're all fallen in our authority system and our political parties are all wackadoodle, then we shouldn't vote at all. No, the fact that we have these authorities has been established by God. And if it's been established by God, then it's something we should take seriously and something we should participate in. And so the first thing I want to draw out of this passage is just that I do think that if the authority that's placed over us is established by God, then we should obey that authority and we should participate in that authority when we're given the opportunity to do so. And so I do think we should vote as Christians. But then the next question that naturally arises is, okay, Ken, you're telling me that I should vote. Well, how should I vote? Is there, for example, one political party that is, God's party, kind of like Dallas Cowboys or God's football team? No, but I'm a Cowboys fan, but I don't really mean that. But should I just vote along party lines because one party happens to coincide, is more like God's party than the other one? And the answer to that may unsettle some people, and the answer is no. I mean, and here's what I mean by that. I don't necessarily mean that there won't be times when the platform of one party may more closely resemble, God's will than the platform of another party, or vice versa. But ultimately, even when we're having that conversation, even when I'm saying that, what am I holding up as the ultimate principle that I should be abiding by? God's will, right? It's not the party platform. Political parties are institutions that are made by humans. All right, humans are fallen, humans are imperfect. There is no such thing as a perfect political party. And so unlike what a lot of people do, I think, when we go into the voting booth, where we almost hold up our party affiliation as being the supreme principle that we are going to use to guide us. We're going to vote however our party tells us to vote. That's not what Christians should do. Now, I've shared before on this program and others that I am unaffiliated. I am not a registered member of any political party. I'm independent. Does that mean that I don't have views that lean one way or another? No. Anybody that knows me know that my views, tend toward the conservative. That is definitely true. But I don't affiliate myself with a specific political party. Does that mean I'm calling out all Christians who do? No. I mean, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that per se, as long as you keep in mind that your ultimate loyalty is not to the party, it's to God. I choose not to do it, by and large, to be honest with you, because of my work as an apologist. As a Christian apologist, I am routinely interacting with people who are non-believers, and I don't want anything to be a stumbling block. I don't want anything to get in the way of our conversation. And lots of times, if people learn that I am part of one political party or another political party, then that's the lens they see me through, and that's the only lens they can see me through. And so now, instead of hearing what I'm trying to talk to them about God's will and God's word, they're hearing, oh, that's just a Republican talking to me, or that's just a Democrat talking to me. And it's just the nature of our society today, we tend to see people through political lenses. So that's why I choose not to do it, because I don't want that stumbling block to get in the way of those conversations. I'm not saying there's anything wrong if you do, as long as that's not your highest authority. And for this, I'm going to look at 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 21. Which says, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Whatever you do it all for the glory of God. All right? God should be your guiding principle in everything you do in life. There is nothing you do that you can carve out from that and say, well, this is mine. God, I give you the rest, but this little thing, this little corner of my life, this I'm keeping to myself. Obviously, that's a principle that can be applied a lot broader than just in the voting context, but today we're talking about voting. And so when you are deciding how to exercise your vote, all right, and I understand the midterm elections were yesterday, so this is like a day late and $1 short. But we thought of it, and this is when it's kind of timely. So keep this episode, like this video, and then you can get your liked videos later on when the next election comes around to remind yourself about it. So you need to be guided by God first. That may mean sometimes you're voting one way or sometimes you're voting another way. And I'll be honest, and oftentimes what it's going to mean is that it's going to be difficult to make choices, because I don't think there's any one human candidate that's going to exemplify everything that we really need them to exemplify according to God's will. And in large part, that's because of our political party system, which has become necessary in order to gain the funding and the attention for people to get their names out there. But it also means that we get a lot of very similar candidates who all, kind of believe this platform, and this group of candidates all believe this platform, when in reality, maybe what if we want to pick and choose from the two? It becomes more difficult. But I do want to, before we end here today, and I'll open things up for BA if I can hear him, if he has any questions that he wants to chime in about here. But maybe. I want to give some specifics, because one of the things that annoys the heck out of me, and people know this about me, if you know me, is when people just kind of give these general platitudes and just say, well, put God's will first. Great. Okay. What does that mean, Ken? Can you give me something more specific to tell me, well, what is God's will? What types of things should I be looking for specifically? So I'm going to give you a couple things that you should be looking for, some general principles, and a couple things that you shouldn't be, that you should be looking against. The first guiding principle when you're deciding how to use your vote should be justice. All right. If we look at that passage from Romans again, it mentioned the fact of one of the roles of government. And one of the roles of government is to use the sword, so to speak, to punish wrongdoing. Now, we all know that there are plenty of people who've committed crimes in this world, in this lifetime, who've gotten away with it, who haven't been caught by the government. And that's why we can trust in God to be the ultimate judge, that punishment and that justice will be done. Ultimate justice will be done eventually by God. But at least while we're here on earth, in order to have an effectively functioning society, we need to have a government that has the ability to exercise the sword. Well, how do you want your government exercising the sword? Do you want it doing it according to just trying to keep themselves in power, or do you want them doing it guided by principles of justice, that when they actually exercise that power, exercise that authority, they're doing it in a way that is fair and that is right and that is guided by good, solid moral principles? And so the first criteria you should be looking for when exercising your vote is this candidate promoting justice? Because that is the fundamental purpose that we see in this Romans chapter 13 passage that the authorities, the state authority, the state is supposed to exercise. And so before we even get anything else, just looking at that passage, okay, I want to be voting for someone who's going to be properly exercising the authority of the state as God says the authority of the state should be exercised. A second principle that I'm going to say should be guiding our voting is the value of life. And before people go out and say, Ken, you're just jumping on the abortion bandwagon. No, I'm not. I am pro-life. I haven't hid that at all. That is kind of a secondary issue to this. Yes, it is related because I do believe the unborn is a life and therefore it's valuable. But when I talk about the value of life, I'm speaking more broadly than that. We are all made in the image of God. Everyone, whether you're a believer, whether you're a non-believer, you're still made in the image of God. And so there's a certain level of dignity and respect that you deserve as a result of that. And I hate to break it to you, but that also means a certain level of dignity and respect that somebody that you don't like, that they also deserve as a result of that. 1 Peter 3:15, always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. All right? So when we're looking at our political candidates or political questions, things that were asked on our ballot, another guiding principle should be, does this candidate, does this question, does this initiative that they're trying to get me to support, does this promote the value of life? Does this treat people with dignity, treat all people with the dignity that they deserve as a result of being made in the image of God? All right. And a third principle that I'm going to throw out there that I think needs to guide us as we're voting is the stewardship of creation. All right. The Bible does teach that everything you see around you, okay, is not yours. Everything you think that belongs to you does not really belong to you. You are a caretaker for it. As a matter of fact, we here as humans are caretakers of this planet, of this entire earth, all right, everything around us. Now, because we are stewards, understand what a steward is, all right? A steward is not just somebody who has to sit there and watch something in the corner and make sure nobody touches it, all right? A steward is allowed to use that property. So if I entrust you, for example, with a certain amount of money as a steward, then you are utilizing that money on my behalf. That doesn't mean you're supposed to bury it in the sand and just give it back to me as is. You're supposed to use it, all right, and use it in a way that's honoring to me, the ultimate owner. The same thing is true of creation. We are allowed to use creation, but we should be using it in a way that is God-honoring and that acknowledges that ultimately it all belongs to Him, not us. Therefore, we're not allowed to use it in just any old way we want to. We have to use it responsibly. Okay. Now, what does that mean? Obviously, I'm kind of getting at how we treat the planet and treat the environment and things like that here. We do have to treat it respectfully. We can use it, all right, but we cannot abuse it. All right. And so that's kind of the analysis we all need to take, is that we want to make sure that our actions are not disrespecting the property that God has put under our charge, but that we are using it in such a way that's consistent with His will. What's His will? Well, obviously He wants us to He wants to provide us with our basic daily needs and what we need. So, using God's creation for food, for energy, for things like that is completely appropriate. But is it at some point cross a line where now we're using it for more selfish needs or excess, or maybe there's a better way to use it than what we're currently using it at? We should always be cognizant of that. So those are three principles that I'm saying, when you are exercising vote, that should be guiding you as a Christian. Justice, the value of life, and the stewardship of creation. A couple of things I want to throw out there that we should not be promoting with our vote. Well, the first one is just kind of the converse of one of the things I said before, and that is, promotion of injustice. Obviously, we need to be on the lookout for that. We live in a fallen world. This is why I've kind of chosen this one as its own, as a con, is because, look, we do live in a fallen world, all right? And we live in a world where people who have power tend to not want to give it up. We're all sinful, right? And so you want to cling to that power. And sometimes, especially rears its head in politics, where people will do things that, really they should not be doing just to be able to hold on to whatever power they have. We should not be feeding that as Christians, all right? Because if it's about the politician and not about the people they're serving, then that's not promoting justice, all right? That's promoting a person, not promoting that concept of justice, and not promoting even that value of life where everyone's being treated respectfully as being made in the image of God. If you're trying to serve but you're making it all about you and not about the people, then you're not promoting those values. The other thing that I want to say that we should not be supporting, and this one might get me in some trouble with some people, but hey, I'm going to say it anyway. It's not live. You can't comment live, but you can comment in the comment section. Tell me that I'm wrong. But I'm not wrong. And that is forcing Christianity. All right. We should not be voting in such a way that is essentially using the sword or having the state use the power of the sword, even if not literally, it still uses that power of coercion to force Christianity upon others. Now, before everybody gets all mad at me, let me explain what I mean by that, because a lot of people in our culture today use that type of language. Oh, you're forcing your religion on me. And what they mean by that is not what I mean by that. Lots of times people use that language when we're just to say, I don't even want to hear it. They try to keep talk of Christianity out of the public square. And it's almost like they say to even have to hear a viewpoint that they disagree with is forcing that viewpoint upon them. If you watched me on this program, or especially back on Trinity Talk Live, you're doing that show, that ain't me, all right? I'm a big proponent of the marketplace of ideas. I will defend someone's right to raise their voice, even if it's something I disagree with, because I think the best way to arrive at truth is for the different viewpoints to be allowed into the marketplace, and for an intelligent society to respectfully discuss those ideas, and that the best ones come to the top. That's not, I don't think, necessarily the society we're dealing with right now here in America, but that is the ideal. And so when I say, we should not be voting to force Christianity, I do think that we as Christians should be allowed to express our opinions in the public square just like anybody else should, all right? And we should not be restricted in any way, shape, or form. When I say force Christianity, I mean that quite literally, all right? We should not be voting for laws that mandate Christianity as a state religion. We should not be voting for laws that require everyone in the public school system to, take Bible classes. I mean, as an elective, that's a different matter, but we requiring them to take Bible classes. Parochial school, absolutely. Hey, I teach 7th grade Christian ed, okay, but I do it in a Christian school. Would my class be appropriate to be a required course in the public schools? No, it shouldn't be. Why not? And I want to quote Psalm 51 for you right now. And this was a recurring theme throughout, especially the Old Testament, but carries over to the New as well. And I could have pulled out any number of verses, but specifically I'm going to read Psalm 51, verses 16 and 17. Listen to what it says. And this is talking about God's view of the sacrifices that were being offered by his people under the old covenant system, under that Sinaitic covenant system. And he said this in verses 16 and 17. You do not delight in sacrifice, or I would bring it. You do not take pleasure in burnt offerings. My sacrifice, O God, is a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. You, God, will not despise. So God will not despise a broken and contrite heart. So when people read things like that, the natural question they ask is, well, wait a minute. How come the psalmist here is saying that God does not delight in sacrifice and doesn't want these burnt offerings? If we look through the Old Testament, we see, but that's exactly what God commanded to be done. He told people to make these sacrifices. Well, what we see recurring throughout the Old Testament is the reason he's not pleased with those sacrifices is because their hearts weren't changing. They would come and they would do these sacrifices almost out of sense of obligation because it's what the law required them to do. But then as soon as they come and they offer these sacrifices, what's the next thing they do? They go out and they sin again, which is, if you look through the book of Hebrews, it's a recurring theme throughout the book of Hebrews about how the fact that these sacrifices for that reason had to be made over and over and over again. And the Hebrews contrast that with Christ's once for all sacrifice. But God, even though he commanded these sacrifices, why? Because he was kind of preparing people to see what Jesus was going to do. But he wasn't happy with them. He wasn't satisfied with them because they were just being done by rote. What God wants is a converted heart, all right? A broken spirit, as the psalmist says, a broken and contrite heart, not just outward obedience, all right? So if we, through the sword, through the authority of the state, mandate people and start mandating people to participate in certain Christian practices, that is no different than the Old Testament people just coming in and doing these sacrifices out of a sense of obligation when their heart wasn't changed. Christianity isn't ultimately about the outward behavior. It's about inward change, changing who we are. Now, if we're truly changed, then yes, our outward behavior will change as a result. But the state, through its powers of compulsion, can force people to engage in outward behavior against their will. Let's face it. The people can be forced to do things that they don't want to do. And that's why the state was never intended to force Christianity on people. We do not have a Christian government, nor do we want to have a Christian government in that sense, in the sense that it's being forced upon people. We do want to have the freedom, obviously, to vote for these principles, these moral principles, and it would be great if we had a world that abided by these moral principles, but it's got to be as a result of the Holy Spirit working in people's hearts and changing those hearts, and us, taking the Great Commission seriously and going out and having these gentle and respectful conversations with people, as opposed to compulsion by the state. So that's something else that we should not be voting for. So just to sum it up here, I gave you 3 principles that I think should guide your voting: justice, the value of life, and the stewardship of creation, and 2 principles that you should be avoiding in your voting: the promotion of injustice, and anything that's forcing Christianity in the sense that I described it here. Hopefully that is somewhat of a help. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, because if nothing else, you've maybe seen through this conversation what I meant when towards the top when I said there is no one political party that has the market cornered on these principles. All right, and so we as Christians need to take the time and effort and be a little bit more discerning to make sure we're putting God first, not any human creation first. All right, BA, can I hear you yet?
Can you hear me yet?
I cannot hear you yet. Open the door, then I can hear you. I don't know why that is. That was working perfectly before we went on air. So
I would love to tell you, but I don't know.
Anything to add?
I voted.
There you go. So did I. I had my sticker yesterday, too, if we did it. So, Sarah Coughlin, you're out there again today. You got anything to add?
No, she said no.
She probably can't even hear me because the door's been closed this entire time. So, hey, if you have thoughts out there, please go ahead and put them in the comments section. Again, I apologize we're not live here today. Hopefully we'll be live again next week. But go ahead, and we do want to know what your thoughts are, and then maybe when we are live again next week, we can take them up at the top of the show if anybody has any thoughts they want to share. So go ahead and throw your comments in the comments section. And also, do me a favor and like this video. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. We got lots of great things coming up here. We got another couple episodes of the 513 show are about to be filmed. We've got a new... Just Real Quick. I always forget the name of your show. I got it this time. We got a new Just Real Quick that actually probably be dropping here over the next few days, hopefully. Yeah. So, yeah, a lot of cool things coming up, so make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel here, because this isn't just, obviously we got the worship services, we got the messages, but we're hoping that this can be a good home for you online for a broader range of Christian content, entertaining, worshipful, and educational. All right? So, thank you, BA, for your help here today.
No problem.
And thank you all for watching, and we hope to see you again here next week, Wednesday, 3 o'clock. God bless.
Thank you.